So real quick, before we keep on going, I do want to show you kind of the agenda starting out. And I'll make sure I get out of the way real quick because I'm sure everyone here wants to hear Angie and not Carlos. And that's okay. Just give me a few minutes, dang it. It's my time right now. So starting out, we're going to show here the sponsors. We have a few updates for QAP, and then we'll get to the best part with Angie and her keynote of how to get automation included in your definition of done. Real quick, shout out to all of our sponsors for helping us with this event, whether it's helping us out with food or swag or venues. All that is super helpful for us, and they're helping to power this community. So a big shout out to them. Thank you so much for all you do and for helping us out. Also, I want to give another shout out to our members of the board. So right now you are all seeing me and hearing me talk, but it's not just me that runs this thing. It's everyone on here. The amazing men and women that you see are the ones, along with our sponsors, that are running the show. So the ideas they have, the wanting to get the content to you, do remote meetups, like all that kind of stuff, it couldn't be done with just me. So give a nice silent applause to all of these amazing folks because, like I said, they're the ones helping us do this. So thank you so much to everyone. A few of the community updates that we have. I will admit, yes, of course, because of the COVID, most of our initiatives that we had were stopped or paused. But I want to emphasize the word pause here because it's just that. It's not like we're going to stop or that it's gone away. So everything that we were doing, for example, with let's say like code and color, women who test, all that kind of stuff we're still doing, and we're going to continue pushing on that. I know things will slow down because of COVID, but things like the Intro to Automation Engineering course that I'm working with Code to Success on, that has not stopped. So that's still going to happen. My course is going to be going to all of the high schools in the districts here in Utah coming this fall. We're going to be doing a test run of it for summer camps. And with it being a digital course, regardless of where your kids are at, they'll still be able to take it. So that'll still be incoming. We're still working on that. I'm really excited for that. So even though some things are paused, we're still moving forward, y'all. Good things are still happening. With that, I have to do a shameless plug for the Lunch Brunch Bunch. It's every weekday, 12 p.m. You do have to bring your own lunch. I don't provide it for you. But if you guys want to hang out with me and some of the other people with the Lunch Brunch Bunch, we will take any one of your questions, any one of your challenges, and we complete it on stream on the fly. So just straight up, I'll say, okay, let's do it. And then I try to complete it in 60 minutes. It's a lot of fun. I'm learning a ton. And I think some people that are watching are as well. Just to give you a hint, today we had 2 challenges. One challenge and a question. The first challenge was, hey, Carlos, we know you don't like the BDD frameworks like Cucumber. So how about a challenge of using JavaScript to write a test using BDD? And I said, gosh, dang it, you guys. And I shook my fist. But I did it anyway. And I used qap.dev to give it a try. It was actually a lot of fun. And I learned a ton and a newfound respect for not just BDD, but also qap. And then after that, I showed people how to do asynchronous and synchronous programming using Python. So, ba-boom. It was a good time. It was fun. And we'll be posting those videos on our YouTube channel. All right, y'all. Without further ado, the lady of the hour, the reason why we're all here, Miss Angie Jones is here to grace us with her presence. She's going to be talking about how to get automation included in your definition of done. I honestly feel like I don't really have to intro her because everybody knows her already. She's an automation architect, a senior developer advocate, obviously currently at Applitools, and of course, the director of Test Automation University. She does it all. She's amazing. So I'm super excited for you guys. Angie Jones, welcome, and please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here at QA at the Point. Today's topic, let me share my screen. Hold on. Can everyone go on mute as well? Cool. Great. So today's topic is on how to get automation included in your definition of done. Again, I'm Angie Jones. I blog about test automation strategies and techniques at angiejones.tech. So definitely check out the site. Also, like Carlos said, Director of Test Automation University, and you can find me on Twitter at TechGirl1908. All right, so definition of done. Let's first talk about that. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, here's a definition of the definition of done that we're going to work with today. So the definition of done is a set of criteria that the team agrees must be completed before a feature can be considered done. And there are two things that stood out to me with this definition. One is that it's a team decision, right? So everyone on the team must agree. So as much as we as testers want to kind of dictate what should be included before we sign off on anything, it's a team decision. The other thing that stood out to me is that it has to be something that can be done before the actual deadline, right? So if we're looking at sprints, most of them are about 2 weeks, some are 1 week, some maybe 3, but that's the timeline that you have to deal with. And so to try to include anything that will take longer than that time frame is not a good idea. And that's usually where people get hung up with automation, right? So a typical example of a definition of done might include something like, okay, we've identified what the acceptance tests are. We've actually coded something and committed it. Some unit tests have been written and they are passing, yay. The code has been peer reviewed. The acceptance test, and by this I mean like the manual running of these are passing, and then the feature is documented. So this sounds pretty good. This is a typical example of a definition of done, but there's one thing that's clearly missing here, right? And that is the tests are actually automated beyond the unit tests. So I asked a question to teams like, are we really done if we haven't automated those tests in sprint as part of the sprint? And according to the definition that we as a team have agreed to, then yes, I guess we are done. But you have to realize that you're going to leave that sprint hurting. You are essentially accruing technical debt with every sprint release. Because when you think about this, let's say that some features are being developed, and typically it's more than just one feature at a time within a given sprint. So these features are being developed. Yep, we have some unit tests. We've identified acceptances for all of them. We've actually went on to run these tests and run them manually, and everything is working okay, right? But when we're focused on testing, exploratory, manual, within a sprint, we're usually focused on that specific scenario or that specific feature, and not necessarily integration or how multiple features play together, right? Also, as more and more features are being developed, let's say we leave this sprint and we haven't done automation with the within this sprint, and we leave this sprint, then you'll see that, sorry y'all, can everybody go on mute? Thank you so much. Yeah, so we'll leave this sprint with without having these tests automated. And so when there are new features developed as part of this sprint or part of the next sprint or the sprint plus one, sprint plus two, or whatever, then we'll see that we don't have tests automated to ensure that we're not breaking something else, right? So typically what'll happen is some poor automation engineer will work in a silo, and we'll leave the sprint knowing we haven't automated the test because we simply don't have time. These go on some backlog that the automation engineer needs to then pick up and automate at some point in time. Now, there's a lot of downfalls to this approach. One, the automation engineer is not aware of everything that's happening when this feature is being developed, right? The conversations that are occurring, the bugs that were found by our exploratory or our manual testing. And so those are key indicators for things that we should keep in mind when we're automating the test, and yet the automation engineer is absent from this process. So before you even think about doing in-sprint automation, the very first thing you need to do is actually embed the automation engineer into the sprint teams. Invite them to all of the meetings, let them hear everything that's going on, let them begin preparing and actually coding within the sprint. And I'll show you how to get this done, but this is the prereq. This is the prereq. This is the prereq. So even having them there, don't think it's a given. It's not automatic, like, oh, okay, come to the meetings and now you're going to get in sprint automation. That's not the case, right? That's a prereq again. But there is additional work you need to do to actually be able to achieve in sprint automation. So here are the 3 steps that I'm going to go over today, and I'm going to go through each one of these in depth, right? And every team varies. Every team is different. I realize this. I have done consulting with lots and lots of teams across the globe. And these are the 3 things that have worked in every case where I needed to get the team from not doing in-sprint automation to in-sprint automation. So these are the 3 common things, and you might have to do a little bit more depending on your team, but these are the 3 essential fundamental steps, all right? So number 1 is to collaborate with other players. 2 is to automate strategically, and 3 is to build incrementally. Let's get into each one of these. So with collaborating with other players, the other players include lots of folks, right? First off, you want to collaborate with your business people, your product people, the ones who understand the requirements, the ones who brought these requirements to the team. So that might be like a business analyst or a product owner or something like this. So in talking with this person, you gain a lot of insight into, okay, what's the feature? But more importantly, why are we building this feature and who are we building this feature for? The reason that you want this type of information is because you cannot automate everything, especially if you're trying to do in-sprint automation. It just simply doesn't work. You don't have enough time to automate every single test that you can possibly think of, because I know a lot of you are very creative. So you talk with your business people to get some sense of what's important, who is it bringing value to, how are they going to use it. They may even have some other data, historical data, like if this is a feature that's being updated or something like this, then they might have information on how customers are currently using it and things like this. So all of this information is really valuable so that you can determine exactly how are you going to scope your automation initiative, because again, you're not going to be able to automate every single test for that feature. The other people you want to automate with are your testers. Now, I really hope that there's no one on the call who has been tasked with having to do both the automation and the manual or exploratory testing, because those are essentially 2 jobs. If you have to do both, then yes, it is very, very challenging, especially to do all of that within a given sprint. So I understand your concerns. But if you are fortunate enough to have a dedicated person that's focused on the testing and a dedicated person or persons focused on the automation, make sure that you're collaborating. And the way you want to do this is take a look at the feature. For example, this one says, as a user, I want to search the catalog so I can find specific products. And from there, put your heads together and come up with like all of the tests that you want to do. So here's just off the top of my head 8 tests that we might want to do for this particular feature. Now, given this, you want to work with the tester to say, okay, which one of these do we feel should be automated? This shouldn't be a decision that you're making by yourself. Get the expert's opinion on, what should be automated. You can include other people here, but I say the tester because they usually have a really deep knowledge of the product, and so they're able to provide the best guidance on this. So this is how you help. Again, and you also have that information from your business analyst as well to help you in this decision. So maybe you say, okay, here are the things we're going to test, but let's automate only 3 of these or whatever, okay? And then the other person you want to collaborate with is your developer. Now, this one is really good, and this is my favorite part with the collaboration. What I do, especially if we're going to have some UI features or mobile features or something like this, if you don't have like a dedicated design person and or even if you're doing the designs are just not out yet, so I schedule a meeting with the developer who is going to be building that feature, and I bring in two pieces of paper, two pencils. I give her one, I take one. And then I say, okay, given this feature, which is just text that we have from something like Jira, right? I say, given this feature, let's draw out what we envision this UI is going to look like when you're done. And this is just a rough sketch. But after you're done, you don't do this together. These are separate activities. You do yours, I'll do mine, and then after we're finished, let's compare them. And what you get here is you can start poking holes in identifying some misunderstandings or things like this. So we see where we're not on the same page, and I, as the test person, might say, why are you developing the page like this? Like, why do you have it look like this? And I can get some insight from the developer, something like, well, you know, I'm going to use these already made components from the latest JavaScript library that has come out, and this is what the components look like. And you say, oh, okay, interesting. I drew mine like this because this is more in line with a similar page that we have in the application. And for consistency's sake, I thought we might do it like this. And so now you have this discussion before you even get started with the automation. And you can go ahead and agree on which one of these you'll use, or maybe it's a compromise of the two. Once you've decided on what that design is going to look like, go ahead and say, let's identify the elements right now. You need these for your test, right? You've already decided with business and with testers which test you're going to automate. So you already know the flow that you need to take. The part that's prohibiting you from going forward is that you don't actually have the UI developed yet. But if you can identify what you need and say, okay, you're going to put a search bar here. Let's make an ID and call that search bar. We have a grid here. We're going to call it search results, yada, yada, yada. And go ahead and start writing these things down. What this then becomes is a contract between the developer and the automation engineer. Now, we all know trying to automate without having proper locators is quite challenging. And as much as we may preach to our developers that we need these, they simply don't remember to put them all the time. And I do development work too. I work on side projects and things like this. So I know how my mind shifts and how I think differently when I'm in developer mode versus when I'm in tester mode. And you're just trying to get the thing to work. You know, CSS is being mean to you. These libraries are not working like you want. And you're just trying to get the thing to work before you release it. So remembering to put identifiers on them, I can see how people forget this. However, when I have this meeting with the developers, and I actually go through this process of writing it down, letting them see this, that I'm relying on this, right? This helps them to keep it in mind. I leave that meeting and I make a copy of this. And I give the developer a copy. I take a copy to my desk. So the developer knows that I'm relying on this. What's great about this is I can leave this meeting and go start my automation. Before the developer has written a lick of code, I can start my automation. So if you're going to try to do automation within the sprint, you cannot wait until the developer is done. The developer may take, let's say you have 2 weeks, the developer takes a week and a half before they deliver you the feature. And now you only have a couple of days to crank out the test that you need to write. Here's the thing that I tell managers all the time. If I have any managers or directors on the call, please listen. This is your part. Your automation engineers probably write more code than your developers. And I don't think you've realized that. Your developers need to write a feature, right? And so they write however much amount of code they need for that feature. Your automation engineers then need to exercise that feature with multiple scenarios, which means by nature, they're probably writing more code than your developers are. So to give them the short piece of the week to be able to do this is not a great idea. And that's why most people are unable to squeeze this into their definition of done. However, if you allow your developers and your automation engineers to code in parallel, then you have a greater chance for success. And this is a great way to do so. All right. So that's the collaboration piece. The second piece is to automate strategically. And what do I mean by this? Well, this is the automation pyramid. A lot of people talk about this. For those who are not familiar with it, let me give you a very quick high-level view of this. So what this pyramid is a model that suggests that there's essentially three types of automated tests: the unit ones, the service ones, and the ones that you do at the UI level. And then the size of each of these sections corresponds to how many tests you should have, like the volume you should have at that level. Meaning your unit tests should be the bulk of your automated tests, your services should be second largest, and UI should be the smallest of these. Now, what's interesting about this is that it makes sense in theory. I agree with this model wholeheartedly. However, if someone delivers me a UI feature, it's very difficult for me not to think about automating it at the UI level. And that's where theory kind of escapes from practicalness. So when we're given a UI feature and we need to automate the test, it's right there. And this is how the customer is going to use it. And that's how we keep falling in the same trap. However, there are ways that you can get around this. Like, you can validate what you need to at the UI level, but not every single thing in the test, right? And let me explain what I mean with a couple of features. So we have this feature that says, as a user, I want to search the catalog so that I can find specific products, right? Which layer do you think we should automate this? Given this, it's clear, like, oh my God, if I have to do a search so that I can find products, then duh, I need to do that at the UI layer. Like, how can I not, right? But you can definitely do some at the UI layer, especially if the search is like something complex with a lot of filters and things like this. Of course, you want to make sure that looks right. So do a couple of UI tests. But we as testers, you know how we are. We have a bunch of variations of pretty much the same scenario. I want to search with, the product is there. I want to search when the product's not there. I want to search when it's multiple products as it's going to be returned. I want to search with, bad data and a very long string, and we get so creative. You can automate those, but you don't have to do all of them at the UI level. The UI level, this layer, what you're essentially needing to automate is that the presentation of the data is correct, right? So do one or two at that layer, a good one and a bad one, and make sure everything is fine. All of your other ideas, you can still automate them if you feel they're valuable enough, but do those at a lower level. You don't need 80 tests at the UI level exercising the same thing, right? Push some of that to the unit test if you feel you just have to have them, and exercise that, because what that's doing at that point is just exercising the API, the search API. So you can do that at a lower level and then just have one or two for your UI level. All right, let's do another one. This one says, as a user, I want to view the details page of a product and add the product to my cart. So do we do this at the UI level, or can we do it lower? Well, we're talking about a details product page, and we're talking about adding to the cart. All of this is very, very UI centric. How do we get around something like this? You can cheat this actually. So I use what's called code seams, SEAMS. And in code seams, these are things like finding APIs, finding direct URLs I can use. For example, this one is saying I want to view the details page of a product and add it to cart. Without thinking, if I wanted to automate this, then I would say, okay, I need to first search for the product. I need to find the product in the search results. I need to click on the product. That'll take me to the page. And then I need to click the button to add it to the cart. And then I go to the cart, right? So all of that is a lot. It's a lot, and a lot of it doesn't have to do with being on the UI per se. So this is where you start finding your code seams. I already have tests for search. Why do I want to include search in this test as well? Instead, if I'm talking about a product or something like that, it probably has a unique URL. Why don't I just go right there as opposed to that whole flow of searching? And let me tell you, if search happens to be broken, then these tests are going to fail as well. And you're going to say, oh, these tests are blocked. Adding to a cart is blocked because search is broken. When you say that out loud, that doesn't even make sense, right? Why would you not be able to test adding a product to a cart because search is broken, right? So you've basically added this dependency on other parts of your of your application when you didn't need to. So cut out what you can, look for the shortcuts. If I can write my automation to go directly to that page and click the button, that's two things that I've done. And I'm good, right? And my test is faster. That's less code for me to write, which means I can probably get this done within the sprint since I don't have to write so much. And then also my tests are going to be faster to execute as well. All right, let's do one more. As a user, I want to remove an item from the cart. Okay, well, again, Angie, we're talking about removing something from the cart. I have to do this at the UI level. I agree. You want to do some at the UI level, but you don't have to do every single thing there, right? So if we look at this scenario, I search for the item, I look in the results, I click the item, I go to the page, I click to add it to the cart, I click the cart button. That's 6 things I have to do before I actually get to what this test is about, the heart of this test, right? So instead of doing all of those things on the UI level, what about if I use some web services or something to add it to the cart? I bypass search. I bypass even going to the product page. I just use a web service. If you have a button on your application, there's some service call or something that's going on in the background. And you can ask your developers, do we have a service that adds it to the cart or whatever, whatever it is you're testing? They might not know of a public facing service to do that. There may be one under the covers that they know. If nobody knows anything, you start digging. So I go in the DOM, I'm looking at this button, usually as part of a form or something like that. And then you can just kind of dissect that form and get the pieces. And I have a blog post on my website, angiejones.tech, and it's called Blurring the Automation Pyramid. And I talk about this in detail, like how would I go about finding the pieces to craft this API that I need. All right. So in my automation code, I just do a call to add it to the cart. And I open the UI, go to the cart, and I can start my test. Again, much faster to write, much faster to execute. All right, the last step. For this one, you want to build incrementally. So I use TDD style approach in automating my tests. The reason for this, if you're given a brand new page, here's the UI that's going to be developed. If you start building the automation out for this, you might start adding a whole bunch of stuff in your framework for every element on the page and all of these methods to interact with every element on the page because your test may need it at some point, right? That is a lot of waste of time and a lot of code that you have to maintain that you may not necessarily be using. So instead of writing all that code, which I do not have time for because I'm automating in Sprint, I use this TDD approach where I just build out my test first. The things that you see underlined in red, what this means is that I don't have this function yet in my code, and that's okay. This is telling me what I need, and also this helps me get my thoughts out. So as someone who does automation, you're doing a little bit of development work while you're creating your framework, and then you're also doing testing work while you're crafting the test. The thing with mixing and bouncing between these two mindsets in a given setting is that you can forget some things that you're supposed to be doing in your test. I see this all the time where people forget critical assertions that they should be making, and I know how they forgot it. It's not that they're silly or naive or anything. It's because they were building up so much framework that it was difficult and they just forgot about it. So I build out my test first, let me get my thoughts out, and then I go and build out only the framework piece that I need to make my test pass, right? And so this allows you to shorten your development time, okay? Another thing, a lot of times we'll have, especially when we're talking about like agile development, we'll have a sprint where, okay, this is like the minimal viable product, right? We're going to give you this feature, but it doesn't necessarily work yet. So in this sprint, we're developing profile pages. So right now we just have the form. The create profile button doesn't work yet. That's coming next sprint, where we're actually persisting all of this data and doing the error checking and everything. In this sprint, we're just giving you the form. So when we release features like this, developers will say, well, we don't need testing on these features. And as testers, we say, great, okay, catch you next sprint, right? The thing is, if you need to automate tests, then you want to go ahead and still create the tests in the framework for this much in this sprint. Because if not, when they deliver the persistent saved profile next week, then you're going to have to automate for this, and you're going to also have to automate for this. And now you're behind the gun because you're trying to do like two sprints worth of automation in one. So go ahead and create the test that you know that you're going to execute. You might not get to execute them until this part comes available, but that's fine. Do what you need to do within the sprint that it's available. Okay. All right. And given this, you should now be able to put automation in your definition of done. But be careful here, because you don't want to put like a quantifier here. Notice here I have scenarios are automated. I don't have 100% of scenarios are automated or anything like that. No quantifier. The reason for that is because you'll get into people just automating for the sake of automating to meet some random criteria that you've set for your team. So if I say 100, or even if I say 50%, what if 50% of the scenarios don't need to be automated? I have to just do that so that we can check this box. That's silly, right? So instead of that, trust your team to automate what needs to be automated for that given sprint, and just leave it like this, right? You didn't put a quantifier on any of the other things there. People have a hard time figuring out how to measure automation, and so they start making up goofy metrics and stuff. Don't do that here. Don't do that here. You're gonna get yourself in trouble. All right. Okay. So again, let me recap this. How do you get automation included in your definition of done? Number one, you collaborate with other players. That's your business analyst to figure out what's important, who the customer is, how do we foresee that they're going to use this, and do you have any data or metrics on this feature, right? And that'll help you decide, okay, what is it that I should focus on from an automation perspective? You also want to collaborate with your testers to figure out, okay, what's the overall test strategy here? What's the game plan of these scenarios? Which one of these should I automate? And then you want to collaborate with your developer to figure out, okay, what is it that you're going to build? Let's make sure we're on the same page before I get surprised. And let's build a contract here where I'm specifying the locators that I need and that I'm relying on. And I'm going to go and automate in parallel with you developing the feature. And when they give you that feature, you should be able to just run it, right? It might not always work 100% of the time. They misspelled the identifier. They forgot one of them or something like that. But you're much closer than you would have been before. Number two, you're going to automate strategically. So looking at the automation pyramid, yes, I might have to do some things at the UI level, but I don't have to do every single step at the UI level. Be creative. Think about, how do I utilize seams within my code? APIs, how do I utilize unit tests? Don't be afraid to add unit tests as a tester or as an automation engineer, right? I get that question a lot, like, well, that's the developer's responsibility. Well, we're all a team here, and yes, they should be producing most of the unit tests. But if you think of a new scenario after the fact that they've already written the unit test, then why can't you add that, right? You don't have to do it at the UI level just because unit test development time is over. You should be able to go ahead and add additional tests there at the unit level as well. And number three, build incrementally. So utilizing like a TDD style of approach to only develop what it is that you need. And then also making sure you're not skipping sprints with features that are not fully available just yet. All right. So that should give you your definition of done. Do we have any questions? Chat, lots of chat. Let's see. All right. Let me open this window big.
Sorry, I have a bunch of windows going on right now. But yeah, we do have some questions. And I can ask you guys, I would say ask the questions right now because I'm going to start asking. All right, Angie. First off, apologies for all the dings and dongs and everything. That I was struggle city over here trying to turn that off. But Angie, thank you for pushing through anyway, and audience, thank you for listening to it. First question: is it kosher to ask devs to code APIs that are for testing purposes, like test data?
All right, here's the thing. I got a funny story. So I wanted to do some testing once, and this is when I was working at Twitter. And in order to do this testing, it was almost impossible to do this testing. So one of the ideas I had, I was like, okay, I can really do this test if I had an API that gave me this. And I went to the developers and I'm like, I need this API. Here's what I'll send to it. Here's the response I need back. I had designed it and everything, right? And they were like, and actually this happened to me twice where I've asked developers for APIs and they simply did not have the time or the bandwidth to create those APIs. So if you're able to get it done, I think it's fine. I don't think it's not kosher to ask them. I always ask, but I don't get that most of the times that I ask. I'm trying to think of a time that they've ever done it, and I can't think of one. Most times they're like, no, we don't have time to build an API for you. So I utilize what I have. Like I said, I get to digging around. If there might not technically be an API, but it could just be a call, like a get. Like, for example, if you push a button or something like that, that might be like a post or a get or something like that. I pull up Postman and start playing around. Okay, it looks like they're sending this data and this data. Can I craft my own type of API here? And a lot of times that's worked, right? So I'll just do that.
Yeah, in my experience, I've always been the one having to do it. So yeah, I agree. They're always too busy. So I got to build it myself, or my team has to. Interesting. Next question. What if the devs push back on putting IDs to elements?
Why would they push back? The only time they'll push back is if you're asking them after the fact. That's when they push back. That's why it's so important to have that meeting before they even start coding, because then you can say, I need this to do my job. You haven't even started yet. So when you do this, I need you to add this, right? The only time I've heard of like real valid concerns is when they're utilizing, like I said, some component that's already created from some other framework. um then maybe they don't have control, like their part is just like this one line, and that generates like a bunch of other code behind the scenes that they're unable to access. In cases like those, I'm much more forgiving, and I'll utilize my other things that I know, like CSS selectors or XPath or something like that. So if they're putting in IDs where they can, I should be able to then drill down if I need to, as long as I have something. The problem is really when you don't have any good IDs at all, and you're kind of winging it the whole time. Now, if they have total control and they're like, no, I just don't want to use IDs, I think that's worth like a conversation, and maybe even asking them, well, can you help out with the automation? Sometimes when they have to experience that pain for themselves, they go back and add those IDs. But that's why I say do it beforehand. So do it before they start coding, and you'll have a much better chance of getting it in.
And this question,
Also, wait, one more.
No, you're good. You're
Also,
good.
if they don't want to, if they're just like, no, I don't want to do it, I'm not automating tests, nothing, you can then ask for permission. Can I go in the code base and do it myself? And I've done that as well, where I'm going in and I'm adding IDs to the things that I need, and I just put them on the pull requests and stuff like that.
Awesome. And that actually answered another question. So straight fire. Next one up. Shouldn't you include exploratory testing in the definition of done?
Sure. That was when I said acceptance test pass, I was kind of being like, okay, the manual of that. I don't know, like, I don't know. I'm not an expert at exploratory testing, so I would say yes, include that in there. But that's not what this talk is about, and I'm not an expert there, so I don't want to go in too deep there and mislead you all.
Yeah. All right, next up, how do you handle when the definition of done includes automation, but the story probably shouldn't be automated or shouldn't have UI automation?
All right, yeah. So let's say you say, all right, we're automating things. You get to a scenario or a feature that doesn't require automation, right? That's fine. I think you can go ahead and check that off. The idea behind, what did I say in this slide? Hold on. Scenarios are automated, right? So you could also like, don't put a number, but you could say scenarios that need to be automated are automated. And if that's zero, that's zero, right? The key here is to use your best judgment and don't automate for automation's sake. That's the key.
I love that. All right, next. Aren't unit tests for the dev of code to write, perhaps with advice by a tester or automation engineer?
Here's what I feel about unit tests. The developers definitely should write the unit test for the feature that they're developing. That should be checked in with the actual feature. I believe that it's a really great idea for the team, automation, tester, developer, to decide together on, okay, this is the test strategy. Here are all the scenarios we want to cover. And then say, at what layer should we cover these, right? So developers, not all of them, but a lot of them are not great at testing. And that's because they don't do it a lot. They weren't taught how to do it well. And so them writing like I look at when when developers commit code, I look at their unit tests, and that's the part that I'm evaluating. And some of it's pretty sad. Like, they're asserting, assert that this is not like, I make an API call and I just assert that I got a response and it's not null. Okay,
Yeah,
well, what about everything else with the doggone API? So they're not that great at it. They need help. So my thought on this is that we should decide, like, okay, what gets automated. So here you go, developer. Here are 10 things that we've decided should be done at the unit test level. And then again, like I said, if I have ideas after the fact, I will say, okay, can I get this done at the unit test level? I can. All right, I'm just going to go in the code base and I'm going to automate those 3 ideas I have myself. Like, I'm not going to go and call them or push that back on them after they've moved on from that.
And I guess that kind of go hand in hand with the next one of, do you feel testers should be a part of the code review process?
Yes, I think your automation code should be code reviewed by developers, by other automation engineers, by testers if they want to. And I also believe that the tester should be involved in the developer code review as much as possible. If nothing else, review the unit tests, right? If you want to review the feature, that's fine. But you can get like a lot of ideas just at looking at the feature and how it was developed. You know, you start seeing things like these conditional statements and stuff, and you say, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about taking the other path, so let me make sure I test that, make sure I test this, blah, blah, blah.
This one's a real good one. How about 3 strong arguments? How to convince a boss that automation is a full-time job? And I'll put an asterisk there. You can say as many as you want, Angie, but 3.
What? How to convince
How to convince a boss that automation is a full-time job?
that's interesting. Um, y'all pitch in, y'all help me with this one. One is to like let them know like how much time it takes. Like that argument that I said about you as an automation engineer, you're writing more code than your developer. If you're writing more, write that down, write that bullet point down and take it to them. And you can easily pull up that number by looking in your code repository. Now, I'm not one to like count lines of code and all of that stuff, but facts are facts. And you can say, listen, last sprint, I wrote 300 lines of code for this feature, and Sarah, the developer, wrote 100 lines of code. So just so that you know, like I'm putting in like 3 times more effort to write the code. But not only that, Sarah doesn't have to, she's not on the hook to go and also do exploratory testing. So why am I, right? So that's one argument you can make. But be careful with that one because you don't want them to start tracking your lines of code because that's like a nightmare. You don't want that. But you do want to say, listen, I'm writing just as much code. Don't think I have all this extra free time. That's the argument. What else, Carlos?
Yeah, I mean, where I currently work, Workfront, we actually use Git Prime. Well, actually, it's Git Prime, but I think it's called Flow now from Pluralsight, which actually keeps track of like your commits, the line changes, your requests, your code reviews. It keeps track of like all the activity you do online, or at least in the version control. We use GitLab, so we can actually see that some of our automation engineers are in fact coding more than some of our developers. Just because we're working on, like I said before, we're working on our own like test data APIs, and that's a full project by itself.
Right.
So if we're building that and designing it, I mean, we're developers too. It just
Yeah.
happens to be developing a different target.
Right. And testing, like, don't let them think that testing is just so easy and can be done in a couple of minutes, right? I worked at on a team once where the lady, she insisted she wanted to do both because she was hired to do testing, but she wanted to get into automation. So she's like, please let me do both. Let me do both. But we were automating in Sprint. And this poor lady was killing herself trying to do both of those in Sprint. And I knew why, because they're both full-time jobs. So one of them got the short end of the stick. And guess which one it was? It was the one she didn't really want to do. So, as she's automating, she didn't have time to really go and do any testing for real, like a whole bunch of testing. So she would do some shallow testing and get back to her code. And so we were seeing bugs and stuff that were going missed, right? So that's another way. And especially if you start saying, okay, here are all the tests we need to test, and then here are things we need to automate. If that's like big enough scope on both, that's another argument you can make.
Mm-hmm. My favorite way of getting people to understand, because it really, I think, comes down to just empathy. They just don't know it because they don't do it.
Right.
But if you have them, all right, you guys, this sprint, you guys test, and you just let them just burn, because usually they do, and they have this newfound respect for testing, because like you said,
Yeah.
they will default to the shallow like testing, and then they'll start releasing these critical issues, and something that we would have caught a lot easier or a lot more quickly, just because that's what we do day in and day out. So even
Right.
if it's not something that's dealing with automation or programming, like the active testing itself too, the planning and the design and the thought process, the artifacts that we're building, all of that takes time, and all of that is us sitting down and with critical thinking designing these things. You know, it's
Yeah.
how can we tell like a designer, oh, what are they doing? They just built a button. Like, how's that a full-time job? Like, no, there's so much
That's
more to it.
true.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's very true.
Let's see. Oh man, lots of questions came in. I looked away for a second. All right. Do you have any strategies for QA teams whose automation engineers are also manual testing? How to move, shift, or how do you move or shift away from manual to automation? So sounds like they're doing 50-50 or a majority of manual. How can you get them to become more automation or full automation engineers?
Yeah. Like get the buy-in, or just how do you become confident enough? You first have to get your boss to hire somebody else to do the other job. So if you're doing testing and you would prefer to do automation instead, you need to figure out how do you get the testing off of your plate, the exploratory or the manual testing off of your plate. And you'll need to just make a case for that, right? So you can let them know. And it depends on if they value automation enough. Sometimes I see people, they start automation initiatives and they're only starting this initiative. Well, one, they do think it'll be good for the company, but two, they really just want to do automation and they want to expand their skills in that area. If you are doing that and your boss is not bought into this, they don't care about you doing the automation. They would much rather you do the job that they pay you for. And so it will be more difficult to do that. If that's the case, and oh my God, Carlos is never going to let me come back, because I was saying, if that's the case, like, go somewhere where it lines up with what it is you want to do. Like, don't try to force an entire company to adopt automation because you want to do Java. You know what I mean? Like, if the culture is not there, it's all going to fail anyway. And it's not going to be great for you at the end of the day anyway. So if you have the buy-in, then convince your manager to hire somebody else to do the testing. If you don't have the buy-in, go somewhere where they're looking for automation engineers.
I actually agree with that. So just
All
to
right,
say a little
good.
no, I agree with that. All right. Next step. By the way, I think we can do maybe like another 10, 20 minutes. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right.
I'm in quarantine. I have nowhere to go.
All right. You heard it here first, folks. 24 hours with Angie.
No, I gotta go cook dinner.
So we have, I'm going to try to word this a little bit differently. So you have an automation engineer or a feature team that they already have products out. They have already a legacy app out, and they're working on a new app as well. And they barely hired an automation engineer. So this automation engineer is now trying to do things during sprint, but also playing catch up. What advice would you give this person?
Yeah, I've been there before. It's real that you can't do it. Like trying to do the in-sprint automation, I swear it's a lot. Like the things I put up here were pretty straightforward. Like, oh, okay, there's 8 scenarios. All right, I might automate 3 of them or whatever. That's not real life. Like usually it's much more than that, and sometimes you're on the hook for more than one feature in the sprint, right? So if there are 4 developers on the team and each one of them are putting out something and you're the only automation, that's 4 different features you have to write for, right? So trying to do that and trying to automate the backlog, I don't see where you get the time to do that what I've done in the past is convince management to hire either a temporary contractor, or better yet, somebody like an intern. So usually that's low cost for the team and it's temporary, and their assignment will be to automate the backlog. So I already have the framework up. I'm automating the in-sprint stuff. We have the patterns in place. Now, don't do this if you don't have anything yet, but if you're already like mature in your process, then you can hire somebody temporarily to say, okay, we have 500 tests in the backlog. So I hired like an intern one summer, and they knocked out like 300 of those over the summer, right? So that's like 3 months, and we got 300 from the 500 automated.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and I think stuff like that, like you said, like low risk, low cost, but to kind of give you the, like, I guess the freedom and flexibility to be able to work on other stuff too. Yeah, usually I'm always like hire more people, but I think it's like, how about we hire, but just like temporary, or let's hire to
Yeah,
complete this
that's a
task.
better argument to win, like other than like a full head count. And like, oh, can we hire an intern, you know, for the summer? Usually people are okay with that.
For this next one, it sounds like people want to work for you, Angie.
Oh,
They're
nice. I don't
saying
have any jobs.
when interviewing for automation engineers, what are some questions you like to ask?
Ooh, all right. I'm different than people because I have a clue. So, all right.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I do, but most people are not me. So, I'll give you both answers. I'm going to give you the one you don't want to hear first. The one you don't want to hear is automation engineers. Like, our interviews are tough. Right now, we are starting to get like the development type interviews. Like my last few jobs, I've had to like people are asking me about data structures and code this and code that, and nobody's asking me anything about automation. I'm like, that's what I'm the expert in, and that's what I do all the time. And that's not the questions they're asking me. They're like, reverse this linked list and stuff. Like
Preach.
build this whole API and stuff. So I actually have a video. If you go to my blog, the link is right there. There's a search field right there. Search for like interview or something like that. I have a video where I go through what I know the tech companies are asking. So our interviews are the hardest. It's harder than the developer interviews because we get questions on their stuff. We get questions on testing as well. So we have to know both of those. So I have a whole hour video where I actually walk through questions, thought processes, and everything. So that's the one you really want to know. If I were interviewing, when I interview people, my questions are more automation focused, and you can steal this for yours. So, like for example, yesterday I did a live stream on a date picker. How do you automate this? So I might show a date picker. I might not ask you to write the code, but I'll say something like, how would you design something that was able to interact with this for testing purposes? All right. I might also give a little picture, like say a form or something like this, and then give a little snippet of the HTML. So I'm showing locators and stuff like that. And then I might say, write a Selenium script that filled out this form and click the button, for example. So those are the types of things I write. I ask automation type things. I'll do the ones where, okay, you have no IDs. Can you craft a CSS selector for this or something like
Mm.
that? All right.
How do you feel about like take home assignments?
Yeah, I think that's fine as long as it doesn't take too much of my time. Those that take like 8 hours and stuff, I think are ridiculous. But ones that are, a couple of hours, I think that's fair. I would much rather that than you asking me to, write a linked list or something like that on the
Yeah,
spot while everybody is looking at me.
yeah. Yeah, seriously. But I love what you said. I was like trying to hold myself and saying like, yes, preach, and like just saying a bunch of stuff. But totally agree. Like I feel like my interviews are insane, and
They really are. And I think as an industry, us estates, we need to prepare for this, especially right now, like there's a lot of layoffs and stuff like that. So there could be some job switching in the future. But yeah, if you're gonna go for a new job anytime soon, let me tell you, it's scary out there. So uh, you
we're not
definitely
talking
need
COVID.
yeah, you gotta brush up. Like I literally had to read the cracking the coding challenge book, and because I'm in Silicon Valley now, right? So over here, like nobody's hiring you without hazing you with some some coding challenges or whatever. So I had to like practice on what's the hacker rank site every day and all these algorithms and stuff like that. Like nobody asked me an automation question. They would have hired me without me even knowing how to do automation for all they knew.
Yeah, now that you say that, yeah, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, actually, you're right. Oh,
And it's
yeah.
funny because if you're somebody who's hiring people, please don't do that, because just because someone can write code doesn't mean they're good at automation at all. You know that
Mm.
because your developers are not that great at it, right? So focus on what's the job at hand. I like to tell people, like when you're faced with an interesting challenge at work, oh, that might be a good interview question. Like, I had to actually think about how do I automate this. Oh, this might be a good one. And then, dumb it down a little bit, strip out all of the contextual information about your product and turn that into like an interview question. See how people think.
Love it. Next up, we have, do you think including the developers into exploratory testing sessions will help give everyone a mind to quality experience?
That's a very beautiful idea in theory. I'm going to tell you, they don't want to. They don't want to. They're really not interested in it. If you happen to find a rare developer that wants to help you out and they want to learn more about it, then yay you. But let me tell you, in general, they do not want to do it. So don't try to force people to do stuff. Like I think about it as if they asked me if I want to do a part of their job, and probably not. Right? Let me do my job, you do your job, and let's collaborate and work together where we need to.
Got a few more questions. We have, what is your dream ratio of automation engineers to developers in a team?
Mm, I would say 2 to 1 dev ested. That's my dream.
So two
Two
developers on.
devs and a ested and a tester.
Is there a reason for those numbers?
Yeah. Well, if I gotta do in sprint, I guess that depends too. So if I'm not doing in sprint and it's just like I'm just in the silo working on the backlog, like that guy in my talk, then I don't care like how many of it is. Just throw it on the backlog. We'll get to it when we can. But if you're doing it right, where you're in sprint and you have developers cranking out features, let's say you have 4 developers cranking out features, then it would be very nice if I didn't have to support like all 4 of those. I could support one of those. So now I have about 2 features that I need to automate the test for within 2 weeks. And then I have a tester who's doing all of the manual and exploratory stuff. That feels really good and comfortable to me, where nobody's too stretched, but everybody's busy.
Okay, and then kind of following into that, how would you maintain like so let's take one of those testing silo teams because I think that's what this person's trying to get at. You have this like testing silo team, just automation engineers. There's only 1 or 2 of them, but they have like a backlog of just hundreds of tests they need to write. Like,
Yeah.
how would you maintain or manage that backlog?
So I worked on this. This is like my favorite automation team. It was a big group of us, like maybe 5 or 6. Um, and this was before everybody was moving to Agile and stuff. So it's still like very waterfallish. And back then, we supported multiple different teams, but everyone would focus on one team. So it would be like one automation engineer per team, no matter like how many developers they had. But the thing was, you didn't have the deadline pressure of the sprint, so you could kind of automate at your leisure, and that's a good thing. The down part of that is nobody's really paying attention either. Um, so it's just like they're just happy if anything is automated and nobody's keeping track, right? Versus, and then I remember on that same team, our company adopted Agile and things started to shake up. And so
Mhm.
one of the automation engineers, she took it upon herself to say, oh, I'm going to go and embed myself in my team. And then she started doing like the in sprint automation. And she became like a whole lot busier when she was doing that because now she had deadlines and it was like maybe she had about 5 developers, and she had a tester as well who focused on the testing, and she did the automation, and it was insane. It was insane. She was killing herself really to be able to do it. So I know that that ratio is not right if you're going to try to do in sprint. But if you're going to do like kind of silo, usually people are really flexible about that. It's not hard deadlines you got to meet.
Right. We have, what does a test lead or test manager do in sprints?
I don't know. I'm neither one of those. Carlos is one of those. What do you do, Carlos?
I don't do anything. Don't tell anyone.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know. I'm too busy over here writing my code. I don't know what anybody else is doing.
yeah, and my position's a little unique at Workfront because like I'm a manager for like 50% of what I do. So I actually have like direct reports and like actual like one-on-ones and things like that, right? But then the other half is more of like a test architect role where I'm designing and building projects and getting metrics, caring about visibility, performance. Like there's other things that are almost like global outside of the feature teams that I'm on. So I'm kind of doing both. So I think my position's a little unique as well because I
Mm,
don't see myself as a test lead either.
mm, okay. I was like automation lead before. And at this job, basically I had a team of automation engineers and each one of them were dedicated to a different sprint team. And so my job, I had my own team too, but most of the work, I also had like 2 more automation engineers on my team. So they did most of the work, but I would coach them and I would also make sure like to to keep an eye on what everybody was doing and see if there were ways to reuse stuff. Like, okay, this person is over here building stuff for their team, and this person is building stuff for their team, and they're kind of building the same thing.
Mhm.
So, what if I build something that they both can utilize? And then I started coming up with, like, okay, here's like a common framework that we all can use, and you can add stuff to the common way, and then you can also kind of do your own thing within your sprint. So kind of like architectish, if you will, like looking at what all of the multiple teams are doing and seeing where there can be better synergy amongst the automation engineers, if you will.
And that's one of my favorite things about automation engineering, by the way. I love that we're just looking for problems or like inefficiencies and just trying to solve them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So much fun. So I think that's it for our questions. I guess I have one. I think this would be a good way to end it. Um, just what advice do you have for people right now going through? I know people are going through layoffs. They're trying to find jobs. What? Not even like an automation or testing question. Just what advice do you have for people? What's something you want to kind of leave with them before we end?
Yeah, this is a really difficult time. Let me tell you, I am very ambitious. I'm always busy, and even I'm struggling right now. I don't have children at home or anything that's distracting me like that, but it's still very difficult for me, just the state of the world. So I'm giving myself permission to relax, to take time off. And when I say relax, I don't mean like with a pina colada and a palm tree. I mean like just go to sleep and tune out the world for a couple of hours, so that's okay if you feel like you're not at your most productive. I see a lot of people saying, oh, we're at home, what courses are you taking, what new things are you doing? And it's like, hey buddy, I'm just trying to stay alive here. And that's okay. I think that's okay. Now if you do find that you do have a little bit of extra time, or you want to take additional courses or things like that, there's so many available. Carlos mentioned a lot that he's working on for your organization. Of course, we have Test Automation University with free courses. We have seen an increase during this time where people are taking more courses now, so that's good for them. If you have the energy, do it. I have some good days where I'm very productive. I have some days now where I'm not so productive, and I'm just trying not to beat myself up about that. It's okay. This is not a normal time for us. So just do what you can. Do your very best that you can. Stay alive. um, I am looking at the industry and how it's moving and seeing if there are any changes. I don't see much now in our industry. This is across the board where people are just being laid off. So it is something in the back of my mind, like, okay, make sure you're keeping your skills up to date. And, in case you have to make a jump, like, or your company shuts down or something like that, I would advise all of you to kind of keep that in your back of your mind so you're not caught off guard. But at the same time, don't like try to push yourself too much right now. This is a very difficult time. Do what you can.
All right, Angie, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for hanging out with us and QA the point. Everyone, a cyber applause, a very quiet cyber applause for Angie.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, please give us some feedback with that QR code we had before, with anything that we could do better, like that ding and dong thing, for example. You better believe I put that down on my things to do better. But Angie, thank you so much again, and everyone have a wonderful night.
All right.